Hi, everybody. Welcome to Boosting the Cultural Competence of Gifted Teachers Learning via Literature. My name is Katie Lewis. I'm an associate professor at York College in Pennsylvania. I work with undergraduate students in teacher preparation from early elementary, duals, as well as secondary majors. We also work with post-bac students who are coming back, changing careers, looking to be certified as classroom teachers. And I am presenting today with my colleague, Angela.
Hey everybody, my name is Angela Novak. I work at East Carolina University. I am the AIG, or Gifted Coordinator there. Teach the gifted classes, both undergraduate and graduate, as well as assessment classes for future educators.
So we are excited to share with you today how we can use literature in our classrooms, but also in professional learning to help boost our cultural competence as teachers. So the first thing we need to think about is how do we change our minds? The growth mindset, the changing of our minds is really important, especially because when we think about this need, right, we have lots of different levels of multicultural awareness. We all come to the classroom with our own experiences, our own personal cultural understandings. And if we're not aware of our own cultural understandings and what we may intentionally or unintentionally pass on to our students, this can have a negative impact in our classrooms, whether we want it to or not. Angela?
So the idea with changing minds is that it can be pretty tricky, and the research is initially not that great. So the research says that it's mostly bad news, that it's kind of hard, if not impossible, to change people's minds, that when you try and change their minds, quite often they double down. They'll forget the intervention pretty quickly. And that it's really not that easy. But there was one study, and that was in 2016 by researchers named Brookman and Kalla. And they found that a single, approximately 10-minute conversation that encouraged actively taking the perspective of others could markedly reduce prejudice for at least 3 months, including support for a non-discrimination law. And this is what they did. It was focused on transphobia in South Florida. And it's not exactly what we're talking about here, but it's one of the first studies that I've read with, actual positive results. And so what happened is they talked about, they went door to door, canvassers, and they showed participants, they knocked on doors, and they showed participants both sides of a transgender rights argument through videos. And then the canvassers asked them to recall a personal experience that had to do with judgment or prejudice. Now, after participants completely spilled their guts, they were encouraged to think about how their personal experiences related to the experiences of transgender people. So that was the process. And then they found that conversations moved those people within not just then, but 3 months out. So why does that matter? Well, this study talks about basically 3 things: sharing perspective, drawing connections, and then asking to share. So sharing perspectives, drawing connections, and then relating to the other person, right? So those are what we're talking about here. So going through those steps is a huge piece of the Brookman and Kalla story.
And if we think about that, and we think about in our classrooms, we know that our experiences really influence our understandings, right? One story I like to share is when I went to Laredo, which is a southern border town in Texas. For the first time, I went to the grocery store to pick up some things to clean up the house, clean up the apartment, and people were staring at me. And I couldn't figure out what it was. Was there something on my clothes? Was there something on my shoe? You know, what was going on? Why were people looking at me? And I left because I felt so awkward. And then I went back the next time and I had the same experience. And my husband came with me that time and he goes, Katie, they're looking at you because you're white. And at that point, I had an aha moment. You know, this was one of the first times that I was now clearly in the minority and people were wondering about who I was, right? So small perspectives change, right? Stories help us change. So how do we bring these scenarios where we can't necessarily have these moments all the time in the classroom? How do we make it authentic, right? So we have that true understanding and the change. And that's where professional learning comes into play.
And so when we talk about professional learning, some of the important characteristics of professional learning are that it is ongoing and that it's sustained. Professional learning is not one and done. And that's why you'll notice that it's called professional learning. One thing that has been shifted lately is the term professional learning. It's not professional development. We try to use the term professional learning intentionally, purposefully, because it evokes the idea of a change from professional development. It should be ongoing. It should be sustained. It is not one and done. Professional learning is based on a needs assessment. You do something beforehand, just like we pre-assess our students to find out what they know and what they need to know. We pre-assess our staff to find out what they know and what they need to know. Professional learning is reflective. It offers opportunity to stop, reflect, think about what you've learned, what you've heard, and then think about what you still want to learn, to develop goals. Throughout this presentation, we may ask you to pause and reflect and think about something. And when we do that, we literally want you to pause rather than us sit here and stare at each other for 3 minutes to give you think time or wait time. We'll go ahead and ask you to just pause the recording and give yourself however long you want to think and reflect. Professional learning should also be connected to practice, meaning it should be embedded in what your job, your purpose is. If you are an administrator, your professional learning should be embedded within your administrative practice. If you are a teacher, a language arts teacher, your professional learning should be embedded within that practice. It should not be focused on disaggregating math data. It should be focused on disaggregating language arts data. It should also have opportunities to put that practice into play. Back when I was a teacher, we had this system of picking professional learning opportunities. So back then they were truly professional development opportunities out of this system in the computer. And I would always pick the one that had my favorite words, make it, take it. Why? Because I knew I was literally going to make something that I was going to take with me and be able to use in my classroom as an activity another day. My favorite PD words were make it, take it, because I knew it could be useful. Well, I hoped it could be useful because I was taking a product with me that I could play with my kids the next day or in the near future. Professional learning should be collaborative. You should be able to work with other people, communicate with other people. Again, these all should be put together. So collaborative, that is connected to your practice. This means that you're not necessarily working with a 7th grade math teacher if you are a kindergarten teacher, but collaborative within your domain, within your field of practice. And they should be a safe space, particularly this is essential for cultural growth because you need to be able to grow. A safe space does not mean you should be able to say and do anything you want and have a get out of jail free card. That is not what safe space means, but it should be a safe space in which you are able to learn and grow. and be able to make change happen within yourself and within other people who are able to make those changes as well. So what you see on the screen is the best practices in professional learning and teacher preparation. And so what you see in terms of the best practices, there is a chapter in the best practices in professional learning and teacher prep book about these best practices in professional learning. So these are best practices, and there's a chapter in the book about these best practices. So we hope you check it out.
As I think about this idea of never stop learning, and the idea of, make it, take it. I'm sure you are like us, where you look for something that you can use practically in your classroom. The research is great, but if I can't make the connection to my room, my classroom, my teachers, it's not as useful and as beneficial. And Angela and I have developed some guiding principles for developing equity-based professional learning. And so there are several of them, and there's an article that was recently published in Gifted Child Today. So if you're interested in learning about those 9 principles, we would encourage you to, seven, yes, oops, I messed up. Principles, we encourage you to check them out. So why Children's Lit? That is the question that we're here for today. So when we think about Children's Lit, it's a very useful tool, and it goes along with the idea of the common read from Ferguson, who thought about this idea, and this was really pushed in higher ed a few years ago, is the idea that with a common read, we're able to provide every teacher or every student the same type of experience, right? And so here we have this professional learning community. We're all reading the same book. We've had these same experiences, and now we can foster discussion. So it's going to be highly effective in addressing areas of multiculturalism, because here we can see the through the lens of a child and see, what does racism look like for them? What are these experiences like them for those children? But it's also a wonderful tool, because what happens is we are providing this experience to all of our teachers in a safe environment that's judgment-free. It's not attached to any particular student in the school building. It's not attached to a particular teacher in the school building, which takes us one step back. And so we can really ask the questions that we have. We can dive deep into that conversation. And from there, we can start to have some growth, some understanding, and then we can touch and make it more practical to our own classrooms and the situations that we have. But not all books are created equally. And so when we are thinking about the books that we want to pick, we want to make sure that we are being well-timed, that we are being purposeful in selecting them, and we're going to go into that a little bit as we go forward.
So we go through this in a series of steps. And like any series of steps, sometimes you do have to take a step back and review a previous step as you go a little further down the line, and that's okay. But we're going to start with step 1. And when we think about the first step, we think a lot about understanding by design, Wiggins and McTighe, or backward planning, or consider SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And we think about this idea of what's your goal? What's your purpose in using this particular idea of literature in order to use professional or using literature in terms of this professional learning experience. So when you think about this, excuse me, and you think about what Katie was just saying about the common read. Now, common read is a longer, significant book that's generally read over the course of a semester. And in this case, what we're generally talking about is using often a smaller book, like a chapter book, sorry, not a chapter book, like a read aloud in a faculty meeting or something. But you could use a chapter book as a professional, in a PLC, in a professional learning community, but we're really, a lot of times we're talking more about a smaller book, but it could also be a PLC in terms of a chapter book. But whichever way you're thinking, you want to think about what's your goal. What is it that you want to get out of this book? you really want to think small but forward thinking, meaning you can't focus on having so many goals out of one book that there's going to be a couple that kind of get left behind. So think kind of small. Think about there's going to be one or maybe two specific goals. If you hit on others throughout the course of the book, that's fantastic. But make sure your specific goal for that book is small. Okay. Like I said, you get some others on the way, awesome. And then you really want to determine the time and the method. Are you gonna do the book study or are you gonna do the read aloud? Like, is this going to be, which route are you going to go? So is this gonna be something quick that you're gonna do at a faculty meeting? Or is this going to be a longer project that you're going to do over the course of time? And that's really going to impact that goal as well. And it's going to impact a lot of what you do next, because the next step is determining your book.
So with your book choice, like I said earlier, there are a lot of great kids books out there, but almost anybody can be an author these days, right? You can publish, self-publish on Amazon. So you really want to make sure that you're selecting high quality literature. We have here a picture of the cover from some of my best friends' our books. This is a great resource for our gifted teachers because it has all sorts of suggestions for books based on different social emotional topics that our gifted kiddos face. So this might be a place to start. If you're looking for something that's more culturally responsive though, you might be looking at a different list. And there's lots and lots of resources out there. Diverse Voices is a great resource. There's multicultural resources. For example, The Colors of Us is a great website where you can go and there's a book list there as well. Scholastic is usually a safe choice. You can go and start there as a building block. But as you're picking out your book, some of the things you want to think of is the value added, right? So just because it's a great, fun book to read, is the time that you're using this book worth it, or is the benefit of the book outweighing the time outweighing, right? So you want to think about how you're being strategic. A lot of teachers right now in COVID are understandably overstressed, overworked. So assigning a chapter book right now is not the best idea, right? We want something that is more of a children's book with pictures in it that we can read in maybe one setting during our professional learning. Purposeful, that ties back to step one and our goal. We want to make sure that this book directly ties back to our goal and our topic that we are trying to help our teachers understand more. And then influential, you know, can this book, by reading this book and working through it, can we influence the attitudes, our beliefs, and changing our mindsets of our teacher? You know, is it a powerful read for our kids? So this is step two, choosing a book.
And I would add to influential is how deeply do you have to dig to make that influential connection? Is it right on the surface? Or so you're working with teachers right now who are, I don't think it's a stretch to say, undergoing trauma. This is professional learning. You're adding this on to teachers that are educating students mostly online, sometimes half online, half in person, sometimes half online, half in person, A week, B week, C week, no idea what's happening semester beyond, educating their own children at home. Like I said, I do not think it's a stretch at all. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I do not think it's a stretch at all to say that our teachers are undergoing trauma right now. That when we talk about trauma-informed teaching, we need to be talking about not just our students, but our teachers. And so when we're doing these kinds of professional learning experiences with them, I just want to say, don't make them dig deep. You know, right here, right now, let's make that message on the surface. Let's not make, you know, let's not need a 30-minute conversation to get down to the purpose of the book. Let's make it right there on top. Now's not the time to go mining for the message. Let's make it nice surface level. Maybe in a year or two, 3, 5. When we've recovered a little bit, we can make it a deep mind for the message. But right now, let's make it nice and influential and have that make it a nice surface level message, because they need they need an easy win. I need an easy win. I think we all need an easy win in terms of, let's not make it a deep, meaningful message. I mean, no, the message should be deep and meaningful, but let's not make it hard to reach.
Right. So in step 3, then with our activity, we are able to.
Ooh, sorry.
In step 3, we're able now to take that message, right, the one that they're able to pull out of the book, and we can add meaning to it. And with this activity is really, really important, because this is where they're going to start having some of those thinking process, that pause to reflect time, really getting to heart of the conversation. The activity, though, right, it needs to be minds on, not just hands on. So just because it's a cute, fun thing that we found on Pinterest, it doesn't mean it's appropriate. And so we want to be respectful of our teachers and give them meaningful work. And so when we're thinking about this, we want to integrate this activity. So how does this activity in this book fit into your gifted professional learning? You know, a lot of times some of our culturally responsive strategies that we're working on ties into identification and referral for our gifted students, supporting those social emotional understandings for our learners. And then how do we expand on the text? So we see this, how can we now take this one step further? And I think, Angela, you do a great job explaining the lead in to talking.
Yeah, so when we talk about this, when we take the text and we use it just as a basis for talking about the activity or talking about what's going on. And so the idea here is that when we take a text and we're using it as the basis of discussion, and we use that as, okay, we have these students in our class, in our school, that are new refugees, or are new to our school because they are refugees, right? And so what text we're going to use is we're going to read this story called When Stars Are Scattered. And so we read When Stars Are Scattered together. And this is actually a graphic novel, and we go through this and we read it together, and we're going to use this as a lead into talking about what our students may be thinking, what kinds of experiences our students may have gone through, what our students may be thinking now that they're finally in this situation. And we're going to recognize all of the complex emotions that they may or may not have been feeling, what their reactions to our current situations may be, their current situation may be, what kind of positive or negative reaction they may have, just as someone coming up behind them and touching them on the shoulder, that we think is a perfectly normal, commonplace, what word am I looking for? Motion, touch, sorry. But to a student that has been through a series of experiences like this, has lived in a refugee camp for 11 years, you know, this kind of thing is incredibly significant. And teachers don't have that, or not all teachers have that background level of knowledge in the kinds of experiences a student may or may not have gone through to have that kind of recognition. And so lead into talking is really just this idea of, we're going to use this story as background knowledge for everyone to have a common read, so that we can have a really thoughtful, reflective discussion about what is something that we can talk about and have a common, because otherwise what you have is like, okay, we're going to talk today about experiences that some refugees may have. Is so you're going to get one person over here and say, well, I heard they eat rats. And someone over here is going to say, well, I heard they don't have safe drinking water and they have E. coli and all they do is go to the bathroom all day. And so what you're going to have is all these different variations of what could or could not be true that are all coming together, and everyone leaves with a different perception of possibilities, rather than all coming together based on this common read of what is a child's true perspective of their time in a refugee camp and their journey to the United States. And so that's the lead into talking and the power of a first person narrative coming together.
And these stories, the sharing perspective, right? It's so important. And we want to keep in mind too that our teachers are going to have perspective, that hopefully they're going to start feeling comfortable sharing, and ask for those personal stories. A lot of our teachers have experienced poverty before. We have come from our own struggles. So asking and creating that environment where people feel comfortable opening up and sharing a little bit. I'm doing a course right now with some students, and we're doing a book study, and we're looking at the book What I Wish My Teacher Knew. And this past week the chapter was on about poverty and moving within schools, and the kids were presenting and they were talking about it, and one of the girls said was, I am so shocked by the percentage of students who are living in poverty, because the number is very, very high. And one of my students in the classroom said, and it just stuck in my head, she said, I'm shocked that you're shocked, because she came from the poverty world. And so for her, this was my reality. And she's like, this kid is neat. And she was her mind was blown at how much the other students in the classroom were shocked by these statistics. So those conversations, and it became such a rich conversation that we were frustrated that the time was up and we had to leave class. And so we have the follow-up, which is actually kind of leads us into our next step here, but that continued conversation, how do you keep that conversation going so everybody can continue that learning?
Right. And I do want to take an opportunity here to let you pause and reflect and think back to those initial steps from that Brookman and Kala study, and think about sharing perspective, asking for personal stories, and drawing connections. So pause your recording. We're going to keep talking. And think about those 3 steps. If you take notes and reflect through journaling throughout the NAGC conference, I encourage you to do so. If you've just been thinking and processing mentally, please do so. But think about those 3 steps: sharing perspective, asking for personal stories, and drawing connections, and how they relate both to using literature in professional learning and perhaps to your teaching perspective, to your teaching process. And we're assuming you have paused and are ready to move on.
So for step 4, now we're trying to make those connections, right? And so here we're taking all the pieces and we're putting them all together. So we're thinking.
Don't tell that Katie's the ELA person.
Well, I love books. What could I do?
She does the talking. I do the slide moving.
Oh, now I've lost my thought. You're gonna.
Oh, sorry.
So professional learning best practices, right? So we're going to think about those. We're going to take ideas and activities from step 3 and explicitly make that connection to our teaching practice, right? Because part of it is reading about it, thinking about it, but we also need to actually make it in our classrooms. We need to make it authentic to what we are doing, thinking about our content that we're teaching, the climate and the feel in the classroom, and that overall experience that our kiddos are having in the classroom with us. What am I forgetting?
That we want to make sure that we're also talking about the school and community in terms of cultural representation, and thinking about when we're explicitly sharing the ideas and the content and connecting everything to teaching and to how, remember, in terms of professional learning, how we're embedding everything within the practice. So don't get away from that point that you're doing this as professional learning to help teachers grow within the cultural context of your school and within the classroom, but you're also embedding it as this is how you can use this skill in your classroom. So it's a dual purpose in a way, or it can be a dual purpose professional learning experience, so that you are using it for you can use this within your classroom and embedding it as a job embedded skill, but also using it really as a, let's learn about the cultures represented in our school. Let's explore this as an opportunity to experience and learn more about what we are doing as a community to support and learn about who we are representing as part of our school, and embracing and welcoming the different people and different cultures that we have here, so that we are truly a school that is supportive and embracing of everyone that is in our building. And we want to make sure, just like in our how we bring knowledge of giftedness to our teachers in terms of recognizing the gifted characteristics of students, we want to make sure we are bringing in as much as we can in terms of knowledge of gifted characteristics. Any kind of books that we can find that show gifted characteristics of students across cultures. And the same in terms of representative books, making sure that we're being very inclusive. There's some great books out there that are guides in terms of inclusive literature. And so just really making sure we are using as much inclusive literature as we can. Reading the Rainbow is a great book in terms of LGBTQ inclusion. Again, it's an adult guide in terms of how to make sure you're being inclusive in terms of LGBTQ. But again, so just making sure that we're really doing a good job of being representative of the full culture and community as we're doing this in terms of making the connections that we see. I think you've covered it though.
I think we're good. Let's do step 5. Step 5. So step 5 here is the follow-up piece. So you have your workshop, and remember we talked about how we're no longer doing professional development. It's not a one and done. It's more about the learning, the continuous learning over time. So making sure we think about our best practices. So how would we follow up? So whether it's a classroom visit, one-on-one conversation with a teacher, or if you have an online support group for your teachers, or an informal, lunch bunch kind of session, or something more structured where you open the conversation for more follow-up meetings afterwards.
Yeah, it's really important just to keep the conversation going, even if it's not formal, but to stay in communication, to follow up in whatever way. And even if it is a matter of emails, journals, checking in, making it a part of your observation the next time you go and do a formal or informal observation, recognizing whether or not you see anything that is reflective of what you talked about in these discussions, in their teaching practices or around the room or something like that, as a callback to this, or as part of the debrief from the lesson observation. What have you put into play, or what have you taken away and continue to think about from this last session as part of that debrief discussion, just to continue to have it on the minds and continue to make it an ongoing discussion.
So some things to take away. First is to, if you're doing this right, if you're setting the safe place for conversation, if you're selecting high quality literature, you should expect to have some uncomfortable conversations that lead to growth, right? We want our teachers to recognize, to evaluate, to see things. And sometimes that requires an uncomfortable conversation, but the Children's Lit is a great vehicle to get you started with that. And if we can keep in mind our research study from the beginning, right? And our 3 takeaway points, and I'll pause for a minute to see if you can rack them in your own brain. If you have your notes, do you remember what our 3 key points from our original study were. Okay, and then our pause is over. So let's see how you guys did. Did you remember sharing perspective, allowing time and asking for personal stories, and drawing connections? Great job, guys. You are doing fabulous attentions. But Children's Light is great. We love to read. We need to do more reading. It's a great way to tackle some of those tough conversations in the classroom. And we hope you give it a try with your school and with your teachers.
And I want to put in a plug for, I'll try to, I don't know if I can show my, ooh, oh no, it's not really showing up. Libro FM, libro.fm is an app if you like audiobooks. And it is, I have not quite figured out, I have a membership and I have not quite figured out if you get this aspect for free if you don't have a membership, but you can get audiobooks, purchase like one-off audiobooks without a membership. But they have what's called an educator's audio library, audio book club. I'm really screwing this up, I'm sorry. But it's a free collection of audiobooks at the beginning of every month. And so at the beginning of them, you sign up for it and you tell them where you're an educator. And I get it as a university professor. So they're pretty lenient with, not that I don't think I'm an educator, but they're pretty lenient with educator. And so what happens is at the beginning of every month, I get generally between 5 and 7 free audiobooks. And they're anything from, I mean, they're mostly they're kids books. Sometimes they're educational books. They're young adult, nonfiction, children's, but they're really interesting and they're free, and they just ask if you read it or tweet about it, you thank the publisher because they gave them the free copies. And so I've gotten that one book that I mentioned earlier. That was the book about
Stargazing. Refugees.
Yeah, Refugees When Stars Are Scattered. One of the free books I got was On the Horizon by Lois Lowry, which was killer. It was fantastic. Stamped, the Jason Reynolds version was one of the free books I got, which obviously was fantastic. My Puppy Has a Motorcycle. Those are just some of the ones that I've already read. Sisters of the War, Charming as a Verb. It's they really do from what I can see, a really nice job of trying to get a really broad range of authors as a collection. Becoming Muhammad Ali by James Patterson and Kwame Alexander is one of the ones. Before the Ever After by Jacqueline Woodson is one of the ones that I have. Punching the Air. So there's some really great stories that I've gotten for free. Again, it's an audiobook app, and it's the kids version, like the kids books for educators, like 6 books for free every month. So just because you're an educator, it's pretty awesome. And the books that you purchase support local bookstores. So you choose what local bookstore you want to support when you sign up. So you can pick a local bookstore in your community, or you can look up a small local Black-owned bookstore if you would like to support something like that. And so it's nice because it's not money going to Amazon.com or something. So anyway, that's my plug. See, I read. Katie's not the only one that reads. So there you go.
Are readers. So thank you for joining us. If you'd like to reach out to us, here is our contact information. We hope you're enjoying this session on NAGC. Look
Yes,
forward to seeing you again soon.
NAGC Reimagined. Feel free to reach out to us. We love to talk to people. If you need me to send you the link to the audio FM because you couldn't understand what I was saying, feel free as well. Have a great day, and thanks for joining us.